We've officially finished the Renascita arc in Wuthering Waves, and let me tell you, this might possibly be the single greatest arc I have ever experienced in a gacha game. I mean, if you follow my channel, you already know how I feel about the Renascita arc. How I feel about the story, which in my opinion is a massive improvement over the one we got in Huanglong in every single way. When it comes to storytelling, pacing, stakes, and plot, really everything that makes a story incredible, Renascita absolutely delivers. And it's not just the story, the characters this time around are absolutely incredible, diverse, layered, and full of personality. Every character feels like their own person instead of just fitting into an archetype. And most importantly, they're all genuinely interesting, whether you're playing them in combat or experiencing them in the story. And speaking of combat, that's another area that has seen a huge improvement. It's only gotten better since the start of Renascita, and the same goes for the quality of life. So many small but meaningful changes that make the entire Wuthering Waves experience feel different now compared to when we first began this arc. And all these things, story, characters, gameplay, and polish, come together to make Renascita an absolutely phenomenal experience. But as good as Renascita is, there are still a few things that hold it back. Certain additions or decisions Kuro made have slightly brought down what could have been a near perfect experience. And as we move into the next arc, into the new region, La Haroi, I think it is incredibly important that we talk about these things, that we have an honest conversation as a community about where Wuthering Waves currently stands. So if you enjoy the kind of content, make sure to like the video and let me know what you think. I mean, we can all list out all the things that make this arc amazing, but what about the things that brought down that experience for you? What are the things you wish the game would change or vastly improve going forward? Tell me all that and more down in the comments below, and of course, don't forget to subscribe and catch up on any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into it. The first and best place to start would be one of my biggest points of contempt in the entire Renascita arc, and that is the Dreaming Deep. Now, I've made posts about this and mentioned it in a few videos, but I've never made something fully dedicated to explaining why I don't like the Dreaming Deep, and why it might just be one of the worst experiences that I've ever had in not just Wuthering Waves, but all of gacha gaming. Because there are a few things that make the Dreaming Deep such a terrible experience, and that's even before we start talking about the gameplay mechanics themselves, because more than anything, the first thing we need to talk about is what it's replaced. You see, when Wuthering Waves first came out, we all had our fair share of remarks and complaints about the Huanglong experience, and yes, every single one of those complaints was valid. But even with all its flaws, Huanglong still gave us something special. In fact, out of everything that went wrong, it also gave us one of the best, if not the single best event I have ever experienced in any gacha game, and that event was the depth of Elusive Realm. Now, if you started Wuthering Waves from the Renascita arc, you probably never got the chance to experience the depth of Elusive Realm, but let me tell you, it was absolutely fantastic. Very similar to the weekly events we have right now, the Fantasy of 1,000 Gateways, but a million times better. Because more than anything, the one thing that truly set the depth of Elusive Realm apart from every other event in Wuthering Waves was its creativity. Just like the Fantasy of 1,000 Gateways, in Elusive Realm, you also go from door to door, fighting enemies as you progress, but the difference is in the design philosophy. In Fantasy of 1,000 Gateways, you simply move from one door to the next, collecting buffs, but ultimately following the same basic formulaic structure tied to its core gameplay loop. It is fun, but it is predictable. But the depths of Elusive Realm, on the other hand, took that same idea but built so much more on top of it. There was depth, variety, and a genuine sense of progression that made each run far more enjoyable. But the most creative aspect of the Elusive Realm, the thing that made it truly stand out, was its use of echoes. See, echoes are supposed to be one of the most fundamental things that sets Wuthering Waves apart from almost every other gacha game out there. But for some reason, and I'm sure most of you have noticed, Wuthering Waves actually did a much better job of showcasing echoes during its earlier region than it does now. I mean, right now, echoes aren't really talked about anymore. They've been pushed to the background, the game focusing more on pumping as many nightmare echoes as possible, which, let's be honest, are pretty useless. I mean, nobody's really excited to see what a 3-star echo can do, whether it's a normal one or a nightmare variant. But back then, echoes were not only fun, they were the center of the experience. And the main way Wuthering Waves kept echoes in the spotlight during the Huanglong era was through the depths of Elusive Realm. Echoes were one of the core foundations of the entire game mode. See, in normal gameplay, echoes are mostly supportive. You use them once during combat, and that is it. The focus quickly shifts to the characters themselves, which makes echoes feel forgettable in the middle of a fight. But in Elusive Realm, echoes were at the center of the actions, with special buffs that made them not only supportive tools, but actual game changers during combat. Where in normal fights, the Dreamless, for example, might just appear once, throw a few slashes and disappear. In the Elusive Realm, you could actually control the Dreamless and fight with it after reaching a certain threshold of buffs. And the same with the Crownless, where the Crownless would normally do the same thing. In the Elusive Realm, it could actually slow down time, giving you this insane sense of power and control. All these things, all these creative features contributed to some of the greatest gameplay moments I have ever had in Wuthering Waves. Even the characters themselves were enhanced. They were given unique buffs that let you use them in completely different ways compared to the rest of the game. See, the Elusive Realm focused on one main character, a support character and a support echo, but it gave you the opportunity to buff the hell out of your main character, creating this real sense of intimacy and strength as you clear this insane mode with your favorite units. All of these features combined made the depths of Elusive Realm a phenomenal gameplay experience, and to this day, it remains the single best event ever offered by Wuthering Waves. But the Dreaming Deep, on the other hand, to put simply, is Wuthering Waves' biggest example of following the Hoyoverse formula, a concept that sounds absolutely phenomenal on paper, but completely falls apart in execution. Because on paper, the Dreaming Deep is a fantastic idea. It gives us an alternate story, separate from the main narrative of the game, and pairs with its own gameplay, and that sounds great, but the execution of the Dreaming Deep is absolutely horrendous. See, the story presented in the Dreaming Deep is done through walls of text, forcing players in what is supposed to be a fast-paced, action-driven mode to suddenly stop and read line by line. It kills the flow, the pacing, and the energy. And because of that, the story in the Dreaming Deep ends up feeling completely irrelevant to most people who play it. And the gameplay is even worse, especially in recent times. The Dreaming Deep starts you off at a significantly higher level than the event-based difficulty, which means that for a good 95% of the gameplay, you are doing absolutely nothing. The game gives you the default option to skip every level you completely outclass, which is basically all of them. I mean, the only stages you actually play are the boss fights, but even then, they're irrelevant because those bosses die in literally 2 to 3 seconds. And the worst part is, even if you could fight through these levels, it wouldn't matter because the event itself is boring and repetitive. There's nothing that sets its battles apart from what you'd get in the Fantasy of 1,000 Gateways mode, whether in terms of environment, structure, or combat design. And that is such a shame because the Dreaming Deep actually has one of the best features in the entire game, the Dream Link, a feature that offers a genuinely refreshing change, both visually and mechanically. I mean, it is such a creative design that should have elevated the event to something special, but because of every other flaw surrounding the Dreaming Deep, it has become extremely difficult to even care about it. The entire concept, the entire structure, and the entire execution of the Dreaming Deep in Wuthering Waves is absolutely atrocious. A huge downgrade from what we got with the Depths of Elusive Realm. And the worst part is that the Dreaming Deep was introduced in the Renascita arc, an arc that we have already established as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, in all of gacha. And going into La Haroe, this is honestly one of my biggest expectations for Wuthering Waves. I truly want the devs to take a deep, honest look into the Dreaming Deep. If they need to scrap the entire event and just bring back the Depths of Elusive Realm, I would have absolutely no problem with that. Because they need to recognize that, in its current state, the Dreaming Deep is a significant downgrade from what was once the single greatest events this game has ever offered. Now, the next problem, and while it's not an issue with the entire Renascita arc, it's definitely been a problem through a good portion of it, and that is the lack of events. Now, I don't want to place all my criticism solely on Wuthering Waves itself, even though, to be fair, they completely deserve every bit of backlash they've gotten for this. Where I really want to direct my attention is towards the community. Yes, you guys watching this video. But not all of you, because I think a good majority of you are on what I consider the right side of this argument, the side that gives constructive criticism where it's needed, pushing Wuthering Waves to do better. But the part of the community I want to focus on here are those constantly making excuses for the game. Excuses like the story is already good, so why would they need events? Or if you think Wuthering Waves is boring, just go play another game. I've seen so many comments like this from both big content creators and regular players, especially since the release of the version 2.7 and its story updates. So now I want to ask all of you who gave these excuses. We finished the entire 2.7 story. Story-wise, there is nothing left in the Renascita arc that we can go into again, save the Chi-Wen story that we're going to get in about a week or a week and a half. And when we complete that story, a story that, let's be honest, would last only about 2 to 3 hours, we'll still be in the same boat as we are right now. So tell me, now that the story for 2.7 is over, what happens? Yes, we can agree that the 2.7 story was epic and absolutely phenomenal. But now that it's over, what do we do? What happens next? The idea that people believe that a story lasting for 5 to 6 hours can sustain the version lasting 6 weeks is not only laughable, but actually a little dangerous. But more than anything, the excuse that I've been hearing about version 2.7 are insanely hoyo-pilled. These are the kind of excuses that, if they were said by a Hoyoverse player, I'd be the first to call them out and criticize those excuses. And I'm sure that many of you who gave these same excuses would also do the same. So the question is, why give an excuse like this for a version like 2.7 or really any other version, regardless of how good the story is? Why defend a version that gives you nothing, knowing full well that doing so only breeds complacency amongst the developers? Because more than anything, I believe that complacency, that single word, is what differentiates a developer like Kuro Games from a developer like Hoyoverse. It's what differentiates Wuthering Waves from Genshin Impact. It's not the game itself, it's not the graphics or the quality of life, it's not anything else. The primary differentiating factor between them is the mindsets. One has become completely complacent, and the other, at least so far, continues to push forward, choosing to improve and refine its game. But the one thing that can breed complacency, even among the best developers, is mindless defense. And we've seen that clearly in the Hoyoverse community, where Genshin Impact would release absolutely nothing. The most ridiculous and empty patches, and yes, the community will still hype it up and defend it. So once again, I ask a very important question. Why, after seeing all that, are we in the Wuthering Waves community choosing to do the exact thing that contributed the most to breeding complacency in Hoyoverse? Because regardless of the reasons Wuthering Waves might have, the fact remains, ever since 2.5 and going into 2.7, event-wise, Otherwise, we as a community have been starving. We've been getting all these new characters, from Frolova to Augusta to Yuno to Gabrina, and now many of us are still planning to get Shiwen, and yet, there is still nothing to do with any of these characters. Nothing that gives us that sense of satisfaction in using them, nothing that lets us feel the full weight of our investment in these characters. And us defending this drought of content will achieve absolutely nothing. It will only make the game worse than it is supposed to be, and push it towards a place that none of us wanted to reach. See, when it's all said, we can all agree that Renascita has been a phenomenal patch from start to finish, but it's also very important that we all agree that there are parts of Renascita that have not only been bad for the players, but downright atrocious to everyone who plays the game. And it is absolutely important we talk about this, so the game does not reach a point where we start to question whether it is still for the community or not. So with that being said, I leave the floor to you. Do you agree with my analysis of the Dreaming Deep and the Elusive Realm? Where do you stand on the event side? Do you think the lack of events is fine as long as we have the story, or do you believe otherwise? But most importantly, has this video done anything to change your mind, regardless of whatever side you stood on before watching it? Let me know all that and more in the comments, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.